G'day everyone, Anattack76 here with some anxious Aussie commentary. Safe Schools claims to promote anti-bullying, but it's clear that the program is still a gateway for gender identity indoctrination. Safe Schools confuses children about their identity. Before the program was introduced into Victorian classrooms, 6 children per year were seeking treatment for gender dysphoria. That number is now 250 plus each year. Other states have also seen a worrying increase. Are they really putting the well-being of students before aggressive political agendas? The more I read, the more I'm convinced this is a terrible and deliberate social experiment. So this episode I thought I'd give you, my opinion of course, plus a little I've learnt from numerous experts working with gender dysphoria and endocrinology, some of which you'll find linked below. I've narrowed it all down and found some interesting bits you may or may not have heard, which might help you draw your own conclusions on this growing trend. We find more and more children under the age of 10 is socially transitioning into schools and school communities as well as at home into a full-time gender role of opposite to their natal gender. Now this actually goes against a lot of what I've read so far. So my opinion is that allowing a child to socially transition too young is like allowing them to deliberately form a habit that they're going to probably have to break. It's a fact that there is only a very, very tiny percentage of gender dysphoric children, and of those, over 80%, and even the gender affirmation resource articles tend to agree that roughly 80% will settle into their natal sex. And they also agree that it can make it psychologically harder for the child to break that habit of acting as the other role. There are all sorts of things that you do differently, the talking, the social interactions, as well as the dressing, as well as changing their pronouns and reinforcing that. And you can also imagine if your family's told you you're a girl your whole life, it could be a bit hard to turn around and say, hey, but I really do feel like I'm a boy, if your family and your school and all your friends have gone out of the way to help affirm your gender identity during your dysphoria all those years. So the first ones I'll mention are Dr. Mayer. Now he's actually stood up and testified in dozens of federal and state cases in the US, supporting equality and opposing discrimination for the LGBTI community. Supports every sentence in his report without hesitation because it's about science and medicine. Now this report covered that they actually did a review of over 500 scientific articles that he went through with Dr. Paul McHugh, who is a leading psychiatrist, has been with Johns Hopkins Hospital was with them for over 21 years. And they reviewed hundreds of peer-reviewed studies on sexual orientation and gender identity from biological, psychological and social sciences. And their conclusions, as relevant to us, is the belief that gender identity is an innate fixed human property independent of biological sex, so that a person might be a man trapped in a woman's body or a woman trapped in a man's body is not supported by scientific evidence. Only a minority of children who express gender atypical thoughts or behaviour will continue to do so into adolescence or adulthood, which is that 80% figure we regularly see. There is no evidence that all such children should be encouraged to become transgender, much less subjected to hormone treatments or surgery. Non-heterosexual and transgender people have higher rates of mental health problems, anxiety, depression, suicide, as well as behavioural and social problems such as substance abuse and intimate partner violence than the general population. Discrimination alone does not account for the entire disparity in these social differences. Now the next one I want to bring up is the Endocrine Society. Now the Endocrine Society has actually been around for close to 100 years. They study a host of conditions and diseases and treat patients related to glands and hormones. So obviously gender dysphoria and cross-sex hormones and gender suppression comes under that. And I was pleased to see they do in fact have conflict of interest information for people who work in this field, because it is something I have wondered about and I'm going to look at a bit later I think. Part of their basic conclusions is neither biological nor psychological studies provide a satisfactory explanation for the intriguing phenomenon of GID. In both disciplines, studies have been able to correlate certain findings to GID, but the findings are not robust and cannot be generalised to the whole population. Therefore, the standard of care guidelines recommend that the diagnosis be made by a mental health professional. For children and adolescents, the mental health professional should also have training in child and adolescent developmental psychopathology. So we're not talking about just the school counsellor. Now in the summary for their recommendations for clinical treatment on the Endocrine Society page, which which I should have mentioned, they operate in over 100 countries, and they include researchers as well as clinicians and doctors, surgeons, endocrinologists, an entire range of people are part of this organisation. They recommend the diagnosis of gender disorder be made by a health professional, and they should have special training, as mentioned. Given the high rate of remission for gender identity dysphoria, they recommend against complete social role change. They also want you to stress the reversible and irreversible effects of hormone suppression, not just cross-sex hormone treatment. And they recommend that all individuals be informed and counselled regarding fertility prior to initiation of puberty suppression in adolescence. Further to this, in Section 2 from the clinical recommendations, we have Section 2.2. We recommend that suppression of pubertal hormones start when girls and boys first exhibit physical changes of puberty confirmed by pubertal levels of estradiol and testosterone respectively, but no earlier than Tanner's stage 2 to 3. Okay, now we're seeing it being pushed down to the start of stage 2. And as I may have already mentioned, they recommend that you're not really on these suppressing treatments for longer than 2 years. Now, the next ones I looked at were actually by some Danish researchers. The University and Medical Clinic that they do their research from has over 20 years worth of experience in treating people with gender dysphoria. This is just a few of the interesting observations that they have made. So in this study, as I said, they've actually used people that their clinic has treated for quite a few years, and they actually, in some of these papers, look at what may cause an increase or a decrease in gender dysphoria. When is the best time that you can actually start to properly diagnose a permanent gender dysphoria that will perhaps require a gender transition? And in their comparisons and things that of persisters and desisters that they studied, they found that generally between 10 and 13 seemed to be a crucial time in their development. One of the other interesting things that came up was actually that most of them didn't recall having gender discomfort at the age of 5, and it was around 8 for the majority that some awareness started to come in there. So they found that in this 10 to 13 age range, the persistence or desistance of childhood gender dysphoria was related to 3 main factors as the children get older. The first of these being the changing or developing social environment. Between 10 and 13, usually, and you may recall this yourself, the distance between girls and boys starts to change and be different, the way that they interact and the way that they amuse themselves and play. We're starting to have new feelings and emotions and developmental things happening, which just unconsciously changes the way we see boys and girls. So as a result, the preferences that are there become more significant. Therefore, the discomfort of the gender role would generally increase for persisters, who increasingly find themselves sharing interests with people of the preferred gender and attracted to people of the same gender. This was another interesting thing that came out of this study, is almost all the persistent trans individuals were heterosexual and often saw attraction to their natal sex as confirmation of their transgenderism. Desisters, on the other hand, tended to keep their gender variant preferences and behaviours, but add gender typical behaviours and friends to their repertoire of behaviours. In this case, the researcher put it as they did not want to miss the boat on that gender experience, on their natal gender experience. So they tended to start to have more affiliation with children of their own gender at that point at the same time. The second factor that this research says shows itself in this age group is anticipation of and actual changes during puberty. As you know, there's lots of new hormones and things kicking in at different levels, doing the things that they do to us, and all those different thoughts and feelings that come with hitting puberty. So for the persisting boys and girls, the anticipated feminisation or masculinisation caused severe distress and concerns about the future. So they tended to have more aversion towards their body and more social withdrawal. On the other hand, with desisting boys and girls, the first changes to the body made them question things. The girls tended to be insecure because of breasts. Desisting boys, however, all seem to enjoy their first experiences of their new pubertal body. The third factor that seemed to be an associated factor with persistence or desistance of childhood dysphoria, and again, these don't make themselves apparent until 10 to 13 when puberty is kicking in, was falling in love or sexual attraction, or both. The persisters were all attracted to same or the natal sex partners, which indicated an awareness of their sexual attractions functioning as a confirmation of their cross-gender identification, as they viewed this as typically heterosexual. For the desisters, however, the experience of falling in love resulted in questioning their cross-gender identification regardless of the sex of the partners they felt attracted to. So obviously they're enjoying the body that they have rather than wishing it was a different body. So these three factors seem to give some idea of persistence or desistance once puberty's well underway, not when they're first discovering that they have parts and their friends have parts and these parts can be interesting. Well, one of the ways that their papers summed this up, as they said, was the question arises, is there a way you can get a real indication of children less than 12-year-old that might predict which trajectory they're going to be on if they are suffering from gender identity disorder? And it tends to be persisters feel they are mentally and physically in the wrong body, whereas desisters tend to see themselves as in the wrong gender role, which if you stop and think about it makes total sense, especially given the current trend to throw gender roles out the window as a negative thing in the name of diversity, acceptance and tolerance. So their advice for children 10 to 13 is that they are thoroughly spoken to about their feelings regarding the environment, their anticipated responses and actual puberty, whether they're having any romantic or sexual feelings or any of those things before any medical steps are taken. So they specify before the decision to suppress further pubertal development. So this is not something they think should be taken lightly, and for good reason. There are medical side effects. So clinical management before the age of 10. Well, according to the Dutch, who've been at this for a very long time now, they suggest a cautious attitude towards the moment of transitioning, given their findings that some girls who were living as boys in their childhood years experienced great trouble when they wanted to return to the female gender role. Parents and caregivers should fully realise the unpredictability of their child's psychosexual outcome. Supportive parents may help the child to handle their gender variance without taking social steps long before puberty, which are hard to reverse. Especially in this day and age, there is no need for your effeminate boy to be a girl to be able to behave and partake in feminine activities. This is something that is more and more accepted, and there is less and less tolerance for non-acceptance of people who wish to take on gender variant roles. Now, this may guide them through their uncertain years without the risk of creating the difficulties that would occur if a transition child wants to revert to living in his or her original, i.e. natal, gender role. So I'm just going to finish up with a couple of little comments. One is by a professor of genetics at UCLA, Dr. Eric Verlaine. If the children are pushed into this belief, it will be much, much harder for them to get out of this belief because everyone will have agreed on it very, very early on. What worries me is that indeed there might be in the upcoming years a considerable number of these children that are placed on a path that we don't fully know the outcome. And the very final word I'm going to give to a transgender person, and I'll link their article below. It was, I think you should look at all opinions that are out there, and this sums up my opinion on this quite well. In summary, kids are not adults and they need our care and guidance. They are immature, impulsive and try on lots of different identities in an attempt to fit in. One of those identities may be transgender. I'm not arguing that gender dysphoria won't present in childhood. It may. I'm arguing for pause before fully diving into super advocacy mode. I do know that most parents want to do the best for their children to protect them, support them and stand by their decisions to help them thrive and grow. That being said, it is also the job of parents to help their children by keeping them safe from harm, including decisions they may not be ready to make yet. And that is a female to male transgender by the name of Todd A. Whitworth. So as you can see, there's plenty of evidence that social transitioning children at an early age is actually not a good idea. And there are actually other papers that suggest that it really reinforces reinforces the dysphoria and can be quite damaging in the long term for that 80% who should be settling into their natal sex throughout puberty. When the Endocrine Society is saying full social transition is not a good idea till close to puberty suppression, you have to wonder why our politicians and education departments are going ahead with it. Anyway, that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for listening.
Kids don't need no gay agenda. They don't need no thought control. They just need an education. Teachers leave labels alone. Hey, Marxists, leave our kids alone. All in all, they want to break society's norms. All in all, they want to break your family's form. Kids don't need indoctrination. It's wrong to dictate how they'll feel. Keep your agenda out of the classroom. Respect their natural pace to grow. Hey, Marxists, leave our kids alone. All in all, I want to break society's norms. All in all, I want to break your family's form.